There are moments in history when a word becomes a weapon, and this time, the word was surrender. Not diplomacy, not dialogue, but surrender. Unconditional. When Donald Trump made that call, it wasn't just policy, it was pride. It was a posture of strength designed to intimidate. But on the other side of the world, it was heard differently. For Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, that wasn't a request. It was a slap. There are moments in life when pride screams louder than peace. Moments when you know it would be easier to just say yes, to just give in and walk away quietly. But something inside you says, no, not like this. Because surrendering isn't always about the war. Sometimes it's about what's left of your dignity. That's what this felt like. Not just another political headline. Not just another press conference with fancy words and big promises. It felt like someone shouting, kneel or be crushed. And that's not a conversation. That's a command. When Trump said unconditional surrender, it was like a punch disguised as a handshake. A challenge thrown across continents, oceans, and bloodstained memories. And Iran heard it not as diplomacy, but as disrespect. Because you don't ask a nation to erase itself in the name of peace. You don't ask a people to abandon their past just to be welcomed into someone else's future. That's the thing about pride. It can build empires or destroy them. And in this moment, it became clear this was no longer about nuclear talks or sanctions or political theater. This was about something deeper, a war of identity, a battle of will, a test of how far a nation will go just to say, we still matter. We forget sometimes that behind every nation is a person. And behind that person is a heart that beats, bleeds, and remembers. For Iran, that memory goes back generations, back to when they were conquered, cornered, controlled. So when the world demands they surrender without condition, they hear echoes of all the times they had no voice, no choice, no freedom to say no. And yet, on the other side of the world, you have another leader, one who believes power is shown in dominance, in ultimatums, in proving you are the strongest by demanding others fall in line. But strength, real strength, isn't always loud. Sometimes it's found in the quiet refusal to bow down when the whole world expects you to break. That's the strength Iran wanted to show, not because they want war, not because they crave destruction, but because they fear disappearing. There's a pain in being misunderstood. When your resistance is called rebellion, when your silence is called weakness, when your pride is mistaken for threat. But I wonder, what would happen if someone had paused before speaking with such finality? What if, instead of surrender, the word had been listen? What if, instead of forcing peace, we invited understanding? Because you can't build peace on pressure. You can't offer hope while demanding submission. And you can't expect a broken relationship to heal when your first step is a threat. We live in a time when nations talk, but don't hear. When leaders speak, but not to connect, only to conquer. And in the middle of it all are people just trying to live. Trying to raise children, keep homes, protect their loved ones from the consequences of decisions made in rooms they will never enter. That's why this moment matters. Because this wasn't just about politics. It was a mirror showing how far pride will go just to feel safe. How far ego will stretch just to prove it still controls the room. But what if the true power isn't in winning the argument? What if the real power lies in stepping back and saying, let me understand before I judge? That's not weakness, that's wisdom. Because there's a difference between being feared and being respected. And there's a deeper difference between commanding silence and earning peace. The supreme leader of Iran didn't just reject Trump's demand. He drew a line in the sand, not to start a fight, but to protect his ground. His nation's ground. The memory of his people. And whether you agree or not, there's something deeply human in that. It's easy to point fingers, to say they're wrong or he's right, but what if both are just broken men holding on to what they believe is all they have left? And maybe, just maybe, the world doesn't need another powerful man with a microphone. Maybe it needs a quiet voice, with a soft word, a word that isn't backed by force, but by faith. Faith that peace is still possible, even when pride stands tall, even when history screams no, even when the world expects war. Because real leadership doesn't demand unconditional surrender. It dares to offer unconditional understanding. And maybe that's the only surrender worth choosing. When someone says the word surrender, we often think of it as giving up. We picture someone waving a white flag, laying their weapons down, finally saying, enough, I can't fight anymore. And in some cases, surrender is necessary for peace, for safety, for survival. But not all surrender means peace, and not all peace is pure. When President Trump demanded Iran's unconditional surrender, it wasn't just a political statement. It was a message wrapped in dominance, packaged in pressure. And Iran didn't hear it the way the world did, because to Iran, surrender didn't sound like an end to war. It sounded like an invitation to erase themselves. It's hard for people who have never been colonized, never been invaded, never had their culture demonized and their identity questioned to understand what surrender means to those who carry the wounds of history in their blood. To the West, it was diplomacy. To Iran, it was disrespect. They didn't hear, let's build peace together. They heard, lay down who you are. Forget what you've endured. Bow to us. And that's a request they were never going to accept. Not because they're stubborn. Not because they want conflict, but because they've been here before. And they know what it's like to lose everything you didn't even realize was yours until it was taken. To them, unconditional surrender is not just about politics. It's personal. It's about memory. It's about identity. It's about protecting something sacred, something so deeply rooted in the soul of a nation that no treaty or threat can uproot it. Because what the world forgets is that Iran doesn't just see itself as a country. It sees itself as a story, a civilization with thousands of years of culture, faith, pride, and struggle. And every time they are told to surrender, they are reminded of the times when their voice didn't matter, when outside powers dictated how they should live, believe, lead. So when someone says, you will surrender, no questions asked, Iran doesn't hear an opening, they hear a closing, a shutting down of dialogue, a silencing of their history, a signal that the only way to survive is to become someone they're not. And how do you say yes to that? How do you surrender not just your weapons, but your dignity? That's what people miss when they analyze politics like it's chess. They forget that these aren't just moves on a board. These are moves that affect real people. People who wake up wondering if the next day will bring war. Mothers who rock their children to sleep, hoping the sirens don't wail in the night. Fathers who pray that their sons won't be called to a battlefield because pride stood taller than peace. Iran didn't hear surrender and think of safety. They heard shame. They heard, you are not equal. You do not get to choose. You exist only as long as we allow it. And in a world where sovereignty is survival, that's not an offer, it's a threat. So yes, they push back, not because they crave chaos, but because they remember the cost of silence. They remember how quiet they were when power was taken from them before. And they made a decision, never again. This wasn't just political resistance, a human cry to say, we are still here, you don't have to agree with us, you don't have to like how we govern or who we follow, but you will not erase us. And there's something so deeply human about that. Because no matter who you are, where you come from, don't we all want that? Don't we all want to be heard, seen, respected? Don't we all want to protect what matters most to us, even when the world says it's foolish? It's easy to say a country should surrender when you don't carry its scars, when you've never been invaded, when your culture has never been dismissed as dangerous, when your faith has never been seen as a threat. But to Iran, those things are not abstract. They are real. They are stitched into the fabric of who they are. And so when the call came, when the demand was made, they responded not with fear, but with fire. Not because they want destruction, but because they believe some things are worth defending, even if it costs them everything. That's what they heard in the word surrender, an erasure of self, an ending of voice, a betrayal of every ancestor who stood so they could still stand. And maybe the word needs to listen a little differently. Because if we only hear surrender as weakness, we miss the truth. Sometimes refusing to surrender isn't defiance, it's identity. And peace will never be found through demands. Peace begins when we stop telling others who they need to be and start accepting that understanding someone's fear is the first step toward healing the world. Sometimes, when we look at leaders, those on the world stage making decisions that affect millions, we forget that behind all the power, behind the suits, the security, the speeches, is a human heart that also gets tired, afraid, and uncertain. They carry a burden the rest of us rarely understand, and yet they rarely show it. Because in politics, in leadership, in global affairs, showing weakness can cost more than war. And in moments of crisis, when the pressure is too high, when the world is watching every move, leaders don't just act with their heads, they react with their fears. That's what this moment feels like. Trump, standing in front of cameras, speaks in absolutes. He doesn't blink, he doesn't hesitate, he declares what he believes to be strength. But deep down, sometimes strength is a disguise, a way to hide how uncertain things really are. When a man demands unconditional surrender, it isn't always about dominance. Sometimes, it's desperation in disguise. A loud cry that says, I need control. I need to feel like I'm still in charge. Because when everything around you is spinning, your advisors, your people, your polls, your enemies, you try to grab onto the one thing that makes you feel powerful, commanding the room. And on the other side, Iran's supreme leader responds not with compromise, but with certainty. Not with hesitation, but with harsh refusal. Why? Because he too is under fire. Not just from foreign powers, but from within. His people, his country's economy, a culture torn between tradition and change. And when leaders feel they're losing the ground beneath their feet, they do what humans always do. They hold tighter. They speak louder. They resist harder. Because that's what fear does. It convinces you that if you don't fight with everything you have, you will lose everything you are. But leadership, real leadership, is more than just reacting to threats. It's knowing when to speak and when to listen. It's knowing when to take a stand and when to take a step back. And that's not easy. Not when you're expected to be unshakable. Not when every word you say is headline news. Not when one wrong move could start a war. The truth is, both Trump and Khamenei are men who understand the weight of legacy. They know that history is watching, that their people expect them to be strong, that their enemies expect them to fall. And when you carry that kind of pressure, you stop leading with your heart and start leading with your pride. Because pride feels safer. It feels like armor. It feels like something no one can take from you. But pride also isolates. It builds walls instead of bridges. It silences conversations before they even begin. And when pride leads the room, empathy is the first thing that leaves. What we see now isn't just a political standoff. It's a human one. It's two leaders, two men, both afraid of appearing small, both afraid that if they give an inch, they'll lose a mile, and both forgetting that strength isn't in how loud you speak, but how deeply you understand the weight of your words. We often think that those in power don't feel what we feel, but they do. They feel fear, rejection, betrayal. They worry about failure, about judgment, about losing the very people they've sworn to protect. And so when they are cornered, they defend not just their country, but their identity. When they're criticized, they respond not just with policies, but with personal pain. Because leadership doesn't make you immune to emotion. It just teaches you how to hide it better. But what if leaders stopped hiding? What if they admitted that they are afraid of what comes next? What if they allowed themselves to be human enough to say, I don't want war. I just want peace that doesn't cost me my dignity. would the world listen? Or have we trained ourselves to only respect strength when it's loud? Have we forgotten that the greatest movements in history didn't start with force, but with compassion? With someone brave enough to admit that being in control doesn't always mean being right. We expect leaders to be flawless, but in truth, the ones who changed the world were often the ones who were flawed but honest, strong but soft. A leader is made great by how well they stand alone. They are remembered for how bravely they chose connection over conflict. And in a world where everyone is shouting, maybe it's the quiet wisdom of a heart under pressure that will finally lead us home. There are stories that don't begin today. They didn't even begin in the last decade. They started long before we were born, passed down not just in history books, but in pain, in pride, in silence. The tension between the West and Iran is one of those stories. And the most dangerous part about old wounds is when they're never allowed to heal. Because what we're seeing now, this clash of power, pride, and politics, isn't just about today's headlines. It's about yesterday's scars. It's about memories that never left. About moments in history that never got closure. And now they show up again, not in whispers, but in warnings. When the United States demands something from Iran, it doesn't sound like a fresh negotiation. To Iran, it feels like a familiar threat. Because there was a time when outside forces decided what was best for them. When foreign powers walked into their land, touched their oil, shaped their leadership, and walked away as if it was theirs to mold. And those chapters didn't end with justice. They ended with resentment that was buried but not forgotten. Pain that was quiet but never fully silenced. And so today, when a leader says, surrender unconditionally, it's not just words. It's a trigger, a reminder, a mirror, reflecting every moment they felt small, powerless, invaded. That's what makes this tension so difficult. Because while the present demands action, the past keeps reminding them who they used to be, who they refused to be. Again, that's the danger of unresolved history. It becomes personal. It becomes emotional. It becomes something you carry in your decisions even when logic tells you to let go. And for Iran, logic alone isn't enough. Because in their mind, to give in is to betray generations that stood their ground. To comply without question is to surrender what their ancestors bled for. They're not just protecting policies, they're protecting memory. But the modern world doesn't always understand memory. It moves fast. It demands quick solutions, instant peace, immediate answers. Yet how can you build peace if you don't first understand the pain? It's easy to look at a country like Iran and judge, to say they're stubborn, to say they're threatening, to say they're unpredictable. But what if we looked deeper? What if we saw not just the government, not just the weapons, but the weight of being told time and time again that your voice doesn't matter? What if we saw the people who wake up wondering if sanctions will steal their next meal? What if we noticed the students who want to dream big but are told their future depends on decisions made oceans away? This is more than strategy. It's survival. And not just for Iran, for the West too. Because America doesn't forget either. It remembers embassies burned, hostages taken, threats made, leaders mocked. It remembers being the target and the pride that comes with needing to look untouchable. So now, when Iran resists, America doesn't just hear no. It hears challenge, it hears rebellion, it hears you're not in control anymore. And both sides, blinded by their pasts, keep pressing forward without realizing that every step toward pride is a step away from peace. This is the weight of historic tension. It doesn't let anyone walk freely. It ties today's choices to yesterday's pain. And the tragedy is, the ones paying the price are rarely the ones making the decisions. It's the families, it's the young people, It's the ones who want nothing more than a quiet life, a stable job, a home where they don't have to fear the sound of fighter jets above. But this is where modern consequences come in. Because in a time of nuclear power and social media, one misstep isn't just a headline, it's a crisis. One wrong word can spark a fire. One misunderstood action can lead to irreversible damage. That's why this moment matters. Because it's not just about two countries disagreeing, it's about two histories colliding, it's about two leaders standing on opposite sides of a broken bridge, both too proud to build the first plank. And the rest of the world is watching, waiting, hoping that someone chooses wisdom over pride. The question isn't who's stronger, the question is who's willing to be wise. Because real courage isn't in making the loudest threat. It's in making the first effort to understand. And maybe that's what's been missing all along. Not weapons, not warnings, but someone brave enough to say, I see your pain, I respect your story, now can we write a better one together? That's not weakness. That's what healing looks like. And maybe that's the only way we'll ever move forward without repeating the past. The world is loud. So loud, in fact, that it's become easy to miss the things that truly matter. Every time you turn on the news, scroll through your feed, or sit in a coffee shop, it feels like everyone has something to say. Everyone has a point to prove. Everyone's shouting over each other just to be heard. But in all the noise, there's a silence that feels heavier than words. Because no one's saying what really needs to be said. Not the politicians, not the influencers, not the world leaders behind podiums and bodyguards. Everyone's performing, no one's connecting. And in moments like this, where the world holds its breath because two powerful nations stand face to face, one demanding, the other refusing, what's being said isn't the whole story. We keep hearing about war, we keep hearing about weapons, we keep hearing about who's right, who's wrong, who should surrender, who should stand firm. But no one's talking about the people. The father in Iran who wonders if he'll still have a job tomorrow because sanctions are choking the life out of his paycheck. The mother in America who sends her son off to the military and prays she won't see a folded flag at her door. The children on both sides who didn't ask for this, but will grow up under the weight of decisions made in rooms they'll never step into. What the world needs to hear is simple, but it's not easy. It's the truth that power should protect, not provoke. That peace isn't weakness. That real strength is choosing to understand before choosing to attack. But we don't hear that because it's not dramatic enough. It doesn't stir the crowd or satisfy the thirst for vengeance. It doesn't go viral. What gets the spotlight are threats. Press conferences filled with harsh words and proud declarations. World leaders making bold claims about standing their ground, drawing red lines, and never backing down. But what if backing down isn't surrender? What if it's wisdom? What if it's bravery in its purest form? Because somewhere in between the headlines and hashtags, people have forgotten how to be human. They've forgotten how to say, we don't want war, we just want to be understood. And that's what no one's saying. That beneath the politics, there's pain, that behind the posturing, there's fear. That on the other side of every angry speech, there's a quiet voice trembling, just wanting to be heard. But this world has taught us to hide that voice, to bury it under strength, power, control, to never admit that we're scared of being misunderstood, of being erased, of being forgotten. Iran is afraid. America is afraid. But instead of meeting in honesty, they meet in hostility. And the people caught in between, they're left hoping someone, anyone, will finally speak up for them. What the world needs to hear is that it's okay to pause. It's okay to say, let's try again. It's okay to admit that threats don't fix trust, and fear doesn't build friendships. But silence won't say it. Pride won't allow it. So the world continues, stuck in this endless cycle of power versus pride, each side digging deeper, hoping the other gives in. And all the while, real people suffer. No one's saying that peace takes patience, that reconciliation takes courage. that you can stand your ground without stepping on someone else's dignity. No one's saying that this doesn't have to end in destruction. That maybe, just maybe, history doesn't need to repeat itself. That our children don't need to grow up reading about another war that could have been avoided if someone had just listened first. Because listening is the one thing everyone says they want, but no one is willing to do. So the world waits. It waits for a leader who doesn't just speak to his followers, but to his enemies. It waits for someone who values truth more than triumph, who chooses connection over control, someone who doesn't care if the camera is rolling, only if the healing has begun. We don't need more speeches. We need more truth. The kind of truth that's quiet, but cuts through the noise. The kind that says, you matter, even if we don't agree. Because in the end, that's what everyone's waiting to hear. Not who wins, not who bows, but who's brave enough to break the cycle. Who's brave enough to be human again. That's what the world needs. That's what no one's saying. And maybe it's time someone did. So what happens now? Will it be another speech from a podium, another press release drowned in headlines, or will someone finally speak not to win, but to understand? Let's be honest. Nobody wins a war like this, because even the victor walks away wounded. The real courage isn't in standing tall in front of cameras. It's in walking into a room where you are hated and still choosing to listen. It's easy to threaten, easy to retaliate. But history never forgets those who chose humility over humiliation. And maybe, just maybe, the world isn't waiting for another leader with a louder voice, but one with a softer heart. Because in a time when surrender means shame, maybe peace can still mean strength.